Hello everybody. Today I am going to present lecture slides on week 1. Okay, so week 1 we were taught about the case study of the can making. Now coming to the point of the can making, we have modern can making process in use of since 1963, and the small blank of aluminium disc is superplastically deformed to form the can shape. Realized that the process had to be a lot of cheaper and the content to be used is commercially. For can making process, we get to know that first a blank 5.5 inch diameter is cut to a thin sheet of metal down to a diameter of 3.5 inch. Then the second step comes to about that the small cup is then transformed to a punch machine and cup is drawn to diameter of 2.5 inch. The third and the final step, the sleeve holds the cup as a 3.5 inch iron ring stretch and thin cup wall. The cup is placed 5 inch high. Another punch presses against the base of the cup, creating an inward bulge. Also, now we have some processes such as rolling includes such as sheets are rolling multiple stages, because in order to make the diameter as thin as possible and increase the length coming to the again the process of forging. Forging is the process where a heated metal is beaten into a heavy hammer to give it a required shape. Also, the process of extrusion includes metal forged or squeezed out through a hole or die. The typical use of extrusion includes the textile metal, copper, steel, aluminum, magnesium, plastic, rubber, and common products are aluminum frames of whiteboards, doors, windows. Also, the body of camera can be made with a component with multi-welding operations and component with punching, bending, drawing operations. Powder metallurgy manufacturing. Coming to the point of powder metallurgy manufacturing in ceramics, powder metallurgy is the process where fine powder plastic ceramic metals, where it is compressed into a shape of compacting in a die and joined powder particles. Then after the compaction, the powder is then joined in particles and heated just below the melting point. The main use of powder metallurgy includes examples such as ball used in ballpoint pens, gears, cams, cutting tools, precious metals, filters, etc. Also, it includes the material. Coming to the next slides on the materials, different types of materials. There are two different types of materials: ferrous and non-ferrous. Ferrous materials include the carbon alloy, stainless steel, and dyed steels. Non-ferrous materials include aluminum, magnesium, copper, nickel, titanium, super alloys, refractory materials, beryllium, zirconium, low melting alloys, gold, silver, platinum. Also, plastics include thermoplastics, thermosets, and elastomers, ceramics, glasses, graphites, diamonds, cubic, boron nitride, composites, reinforced plastic, metals, ceramic metric composition, nanomaterials, shapes, memory alloys, etc. Properties of materials. Coming to the point of properties of materials, we have mechanical properties as well as the physical properties. Mechanical properties include strength, toughness, hardness, ductility, elasticity, fatigue, and creep. And physical properties include density, specific heat, melting and boiling point, thermal expansion and conductivity, electrical and magnetic properties. Also, the chemical properties include such as oxidation, corrosion, flammability, and toxicity. The objective of all these purposes is to apply the knowledge to a part and tool design and diagnose the plant problems. Know what is from this we know that what is required in quantitative terms, how to achieve, and what process are applied. Simple and approximate calculations to justify above and 3 needs to be done in an iterative manner. Also, now coming to the slides of stress and strain, I would include one more topic such as stress tensor in my lecture. Stress and strain. We need to understand the basic of stress and strain, elasticity and plasticity at macroscopic level. Assumptions, continuum mechanics gives their discontinuity in character, no atom, that is uniform distribution of materials. Coming to stress. Stress is defined as the force per unit area, which is given by Fn by A, and strain is the change in length per unit length, that is delta L by L. It can also be defined in 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, elastic versus plastic strain. Coming to the example of the elastic versus, a body under certain constraints and under some kinds of forces and stress, what kind of state of a particular point is needed. The point is an infinitesimally small element respected by a cube. Coming here, we show that the stress on top surface. See, this is a cubical body where the stresses are given, which is represented in a 3-dimensional figure.
X, Y and Z. The stresses are shown here, the sigma Y, sigma Yx and sigma Yz, and the stresses are shown here. And taking the infinitesimal element, we have it is cut to an angle theta, where area is given as A into B, the cross-sectional area. So stress on top surface is given as sigma Yy, which is equal to the W by the area, force per unit area. Given angle theta, we have Fn is equal to, Fn is given as, Fn here is given as W into cos theta, and Ft is the total force, which is given, Ft is the tangential force, which is, the tangential force, which is given by W into sin theta, and A is the A theta is the A by cos theta. The force perpendicular to the plane create normal stress sigma x comma sigma y, where sigma y prime gives an Fn by A theta, which is equal to sigma yy by cos square theta, and sigma y prime x prime is equal to Ft, which is equal to tangential force by A theta, which is given as Fyy by A cos theta into sin theta. Also we have described we have described the all the forces, and sigma ij defines the plane, and I defines the plane, and j defines the direction of the force. What happens at coming to the point of stress tensor? Stress tensor includes stress tensor is also given by this fact, generalized stress tensor, and its component can be written as, here in cube we have defined a body where all the stresses are shown, the tangential, the normal and the shear stress, where we assume that sigma x where we assume that sigma xy is equal to same as sigma yx. So generalized stress tensor of the component is given as sigma is equal to sigma xx in a matrix tabulated form, where it is in a matrix tabulated form. Generalized sigma is equal to sigma xx comma sigma yx and sigma xz, sigma yx, sigma yy, sigma yz, sigma zx, sigma zy and sigma zz. Okay, this is the generalized stress this is the generalized stress tensor given for a body. So now we have the principal stresses. We started with the normal stress and looked at planes where both normal stress and shear stress were acting. Inverse is also possible, where we can find a plane where no shear stress are acting, and these are called as principal stresses. Principal stresses are important in determining onset of yielding. In general, the principal stresses are given by sigma principal stresses are roots of sigma p cube minus I1 sigma p square minus I2 sigma p minus I3 is equal to 0, where sigma p is the principal stress, and where the invariant I1, I2 and I3 can be given by the following equations, where reference frame of measuring various stress does not matter. Hence these are called as invariant, where I1 is equal to sigma xx plus sigma yy plus sigma zz, I2 is equal to sigma xy square plus sigma yz square plus sigma zx square plus sigma xx minus sigma xx into sigma yy minus sigma yy into sigma zz minus sigma zz into sigma yy. Okay, now I3 is also given as sigma xx into sigma yy into sigma zz plus 2 times of sigma xy into sigma yz into sigma zx minus sigma xx into sigma yz square minus sigma yy into sigma zx square and minus sigma zz into sigma xy square. In terms of principal stresses, we can say that I1 is equal to sigma 1 plus sigma 2 plus sigma 3, I2 is equal to negative of sigma 1 sigma 2 plus sigma 2 sigma 3 plus sigma 3 sigma 1, and I3 is equal to sigma 1 sigma 2 into sigma 3. Plane stress transformation. Plane stress and transformation. Idealization shear stress in the z directions are negligible. Simple transformation rules can be obtained for this idealization, where the transformations can be shown as here sigma x prime is equal to sigma x plus sigma y by 2 plus sigma x minus sigma y by 2 plus cos 2 phi plus sigma into cos 2 phi plus sigma xy into sin 2 phi. Also sigma y prime can be given as sigma x plus sigma y by 2 minus sigma x minus sigma y by 2 into cos 2 phi minus sigma xy into sin 2 phi. The third part sigma x sigma prime xy is equal to negative of sigma x minus sigma y by 2 sin 2 phi plus sigma xy into cos 2 phi, where sigma x prime is approximately equal to sigma y prime when rotated by an angle phi plus theta. So here I conclude my lecture slides, and now it is continued by one of my colleagues, Mr. Avneet Nigam. Thanks.
Let's start with the definition of stress. Stress, as you all know, is nothing but the simple mathematical formulation given by force by area or force per unit area. Stress is a scalar quantity. Now, in any constrained body, which is experiencing some forces, we can define a state of stress for different points in the body. Now this can be done by dividing it into small points or very infinitesimal entities, which for mathematical simplification are taken as cubes. Now the stress distribution on this cube can be given as follows. We have this cube, and in this cube we have the 6 faces of the cube, and the coordinate axis we have chosen are orthogonal axes x, y and z, as we do normally, the Cartesian axes. The perpendicular stress acting on the face, which has got the x-axis as the normal to it, is taken as sigma xx. Now consider any stress segment or any stress mathematical symbol is given as sigma ij. The I subscript or the first subscript denotes the plane on which denotes the plane, and the plane is given by the direction of the normal to the plane. So sigma ij is nothing but the stress and the stress acting on the plane with I direction as the normal to it, and the stress acting in the direction j. So sigma ij, and we have got a generalized state of stress which is given by a two-ranked tensor. In this way, we have got a 3 by 3 matrix, and the elements of the matrix are sigma xx, sigma xy, sigma xz, and so on. Okay, so now we move on to the definition of principal stresses. But okay, before that, I'd like to tell you how the simple vector transformations of finding stresses, simple stresses when we consider different coordinate axes or simple transformations in the xy case. For example, we have got this cuboid or a cuboidal body, and we have this weight, we have this force acting on it upwards and downwards, and then we have got then we slice it across the cross section, making an angle theta with the horizontal. So now we have a plane which is inclined at an angle to the horizontal, and it makes an angle of 30 degrees with the of theta degrees, or whatever you want to consider it as, with the x-axis. And we already know that there is a force acting upwards on this, and then what we do is that we construct a new set of axes, and these axes are simply the orthogonal axes, one axis going perpendicular to the plane and the other tangential to the plane. So the initial vertical direction of the force is making an angle theta with the axis which is perpendicular to the new. Mathematically, this is how we develop the relation between the new set of stresses which we have, that is the stresses in the newly formed Cartesian axes and the previous initial Cartesian axes. Now we come to the definition of principal stresses. In any stress body, we can always find 3 planes where the only stresses acting on it are in the direction perpendicular to the plane, that is in the direction of the normal vector, and there are no shear stresses acting on those planes. Now we have already seen that the stress is nothing but a second rank tensor. So what we do now is that, now suppose in this case what we are doing is that we are considering only the principal stresses. So what we do now is that let n vector be any vector perpendicular to the given planes, right? So what we are doing now is that we are considering only those stresses which are perpendicular to the planes which we are considering. So we can write our tensor which is denoted by a capital gamma sign. We can write that as lambda n vector. Okay, here lambda is nothing but a scalar quantity, but in this case it is going to be nothing but the principal stresses, because we are considering only those planes where or we are considering the case where the stresses are only in the perpendicular direction to the planes considered. Okay, and in a general way we define our stress tensor as gamma I is equal to sigma ij nj. Now nj gives us a direction, of course, as we know that sigma ij, and the j subscript denotes nothing but the direction of the stress acting. Okay, now let us define another tensor, a second rank tensor ni, which is given by delta ij nj. Now delta ij is nothing but the identity matrix, which is given as delta ij is as a matrix where the principal diagonal elements are 1 and the other elements are 0. So in this case, of course, we have gamma I is nothing but lambda ni, Now equating it with the general form, that is sigma ij nj, we have sigma ij nj is equal to lambda ni. Now ni is nothing but delta ij nj. So doing some mathematical steps, we arrive at this final equation which says nj into, as you can see, nj into sigma ij minus lambda delta ij is equal to 0. Now for this equation to have non-trivial solutions, in order to have non-trivial solutions, we set the determinant of the entity in brackets to be 0. So setting the entity to be 0, we have the following equation. The determinant, this whole determinant is equal to 0, and solving this determinant, we get this particular equation, which is a cubic equation for the variable or for the entity lambda. And as you can see, the coefficients of lambda have been denoted by I1, I2 and I3. And I3 is not a coefficient, it's just a constant. But these are invariants. That is, in any stress, in any stress condition or any state of stress, it doesn't change. Whether you rotate it, you do anything with it, it's not going to change. And of course, as you solve the above determinant, you can see that I1 is given by sigma xx plus sigma yy plus sigma zz, or in a general form it is given as sigma ii. I2 is given as half of sigma ii minus sigma jj minus sigma ij sigma ji, where I, j, they run from of course 1 to 3 or x to z as you please, and I3 is nothing but sigma xx sigma yy sigma zz plus 2 sigma xy sigma yz sigma zx minus sigma xy square sigma zz minus sigma yz square sigma xx minus sigma zx square sigma yy. And as we have already seen that initially we had already seen from our definition of principal stresses that lambda is nothing but the principal stresses. So of course lambda, the solution to these equations would give us the 3 principal stresses. That is, the solution to this cubic equation will give us the 3 principal stresses, and the invariants in terms of the principal stresses can be given as follows. I1 is the sum of the 3 principal stresses, that is sigma 1 plus sigma 2 plus sigma 3. I2 is equal to sigma 1 sigma 2 plus sigma 2 sigma 3 plus sigma 3 sigma 1. I3 is equal to sigma 1 sigma 2 sigma 3. And before we shift to another topic, of course I'd like to remind you that sigma 1 sigma 2 sigma 3 are taken as follows. Sigma 1 is greater than sigma 2 is greater than sigma 3 algebraically. So sigma 1 is algebraically the greatest, sigma 3 is algebraically the least of all the 3 principles. So now we discuss transformation in the plane stress condition. Plane stress, as you know, is is the condition where we neglect the stress in the third direction. So the transformation equations, by doing simple vector calculations, for example in this particular case, we have a body which is given by this thing, the shaded area. We have this body, and initially we had our coordinate axis set as this, and after that we rotated it by an angle, say theta. And then what we can do is that we can again set up the new sigma xx, sigma xy and so on, and then we can resolve them in the original direction, or the stresses which were earlier, or the earlier initial stresses into the new direction, and consequently solve, and we can reach a relation between the sigma, between the new sigma, or let us denote it by the dashed symbol. We can have that the new sigma dash x can be related to the original sigma x sigma y components, similarly as the new sigma dash y component can be related to the initial sigma x sigma y components, and so can the new sigma x dash y dash component be related to the initial component. So we are done with the transformation part, and before we come to the concept of the Mohr circle, I'd like to tell you a few things about the case where we have a non-homogeneous stress distribution. So in this case what we do is that we have got now let us consider a very small entity or a small cuboid which has got its dimensions as dx, dy, dz in the in the direction of the respective coordinate axes. Now consider this thing. Now we have got as you can see a small cuboidal entity, and we can assume that at the point P, which is the point exactly at the center, we can have our stresses as sigma x, sigma y, sigma z and so on, tau xy, tau xz and so on. And this is exactly at the center, that is at the spatial configuration or at the spatial point dx by 2, dy by 2 and dz by 2. Now we can use expansion series expansion and things and stuff like that, for example Taylor's expansion, and we can reach the conclusion that, as you can see in the diagram, that if it's sigma x, if the stress normal to the in the x direction, that is sigma xx is sigma xx at the point P, then on the plane having x direction as its normal component and situated at a distance dx from the origin, by using Taylor's expansion, we can see that we can give the stress, that is sigma xx, as sigma x plus the partial derivative of sigma x multiplied by the distance it moves, that is dx by 2. Similarly, at the face which is towards the left of the point P, that is towards the origin, we can write sigma as the we can write the normal stress in the direction of the x-axis as sigma x minus partial derivative of sigma x multiplied by dx by 2, and so on and so forth. We can resolve all these all the shear stress components plus the normal stress components in different directions, for example y and z, and we can write all these components with respect to the point P and using all our expansions. Now we just follow the simple procedure of balancing the forces, because we have already assumed that this body is going to be in equilibrium. So what we do is that we just balance the forces. First we balance the x direction forces, and as you can see, I've shown a calculation of the x direction forces. And when we solve this whole thing, and of course you must remember to multiply the area, because we are balancing the forces, not the stresses. So once we balance the forces, we get this particular equation, and similarly by balancing the y and z components of the forces, we can get these two equations. So these equations, all in all, they describe a body in equilibrium but in a non-homogeneous. Okay, so now we come to the Morse circle concept. As you had already seen, that the transformation equations are given. Let's first consider the plane stress condition. So the transformation equations are given by the following equations, as we had already seen, and these equations were derived by simple vector calculations and vector manipulations, and we had reached this particular set of equations. And as you can see, and if you can relate, you can see that the points sigma dash, sigma y, sigma dash y and sigma x dash y dash, or the point sigma x, sigma y, sigma xy, they can be plotted on a circle with the radius given as whole under root of half of sigma x minus sigma y whole square of this thing plus tau xy whole square. This is the radius of the circle, and the center of the circle is given as sigma x plus sigma y by 2, 0. But we have to pay attention to the following fact, that in this circle we are plotting our points as sigma x x comma minus tau xy and sigma y comma plus tau xy. Only when we plot the our points as these, then this is the points given by sigma dash x or sigma dash y along with the shear component, that is sigma x dash y dash. We can plot these points on the circle only when we plot sigma x dash comma minus sigma x dash y dash and sigma y dash comma sigma x dash y dash, and so is the case for the case when we are considering the normal xy before rotating, and that is before rotating this. And okay, one more thing is that this was the case when we rotate our coordinate axis by an angle theta. But when we are using the Mohr circle as given here, as we can see here, the Mohr circle in this case, for example, we have our coordinate axis aligned like this, and then we have a new set of axes which we obtain by rotating the present set of axes by an angle theta in the anti-clockwise direction. So what for now suppose we have got, and now suppose this initial set of coordinate axes depicted nothing but the plane but the principal stress case. So our stress, our the plane which will be depicting, or the line which will be depicting this plane, would be nothing but the diameter, the horizontal diameter corresponding to the x-axis, that is the sigma axis. Okay, one more thing before I'm sorry I forgot. The x, while drawing the circle, the axis which we normally consider as x is sigma, and the y-axis is tau. That is we plot tau versus sigma, and sigma and all the normal forces are plotted on the sigma axis, of course. And okay, coming back to our original discussion, if the coordinate axis rotated anti-clockwise by an angle theta, then corresponding to that we have to rotate our initial plane by an angle 2 theta in the Mohr circle, as we can see here. But in this case, this is a specialized case because we are considering our initial state of stress to be the principal stress condition, so we are rotating it by an angle 2 theta. Okay, after the completion of the discussion of the plane stress Mohr circle, we come to the discussion of the 3D Mohr circle. In this case, we construct Mohr circles in the same way as we do in the plane stress condition, but here we take couples. For example, first we consider the xz axis, then we consider the zy axis, then we consider the xy axis. And when we do this, then we have 3 circles, and what happens is this, that we have got in this enclosing circle, and then we have got 2 circles which touch each other and touch the outer circle too. So this is very simple. Again, we have this thing that sigma 1 is greater than sigma 2 is greater than sigma 3, where sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 are the principal stresses. So with this we come to the end of the discussion of first week's Tuesday's lectures, wherein we have, okay, so we end by recapitulating what we have discussed. So we discussed Mohr circles, we discussed stress tensors, we discussed the stress conditions where the stress distribution was not homogeneous, but the body was in equilibrium. Then we defined what are principal stresses. Then and finally, after the principal stresses discussions, we came to the Mohr circle discussion, first of the plane stress condition, then of the 3D case. Thank you.
Good morning. We'll today talk about the plasticity and the yield criteria. First of all, plasticity. What is plasticity? Plasticity is the property of material to deform in a non-reversible way when a force is applied on it. The plasticity is a very important property of material because it is due to plasticity that we can perform metalworking and mold the metal pieces and in our desirable shapes. A true stress strain curve is frequently called a flow curve because it gives the stress required to cause the metal to flow plastically until a given strain. Loading and unloading causes hardening, which is obvious with the increase in the flow yield stress. The plastic stress strain is a complex behavior. Unlike elastic, equations have been used to fit the behavior. Most common is the power law equation, which we identify as sigma is equal to k epsilon raised to the power n. The stress is not always uniaxial. In different process of metalworking, we encounter different kinds of stresses. For example, in rolling it is biaxial compression, in forging it is triaxial compression, extrusion also triaxial compression, and swaging biaxial compression. In elastic regime, Hooke's law relates stress and strain where any stress results in a strain. In plastic regime, a minimum stress is required and must be reached before deformation can be attained. The relation between plastic stress strain is mere approximation compared to elastic stress strain relations, which are more exact. In plastic regime, equations are obtained assuming certain models by uniting experimental observations with mathematical expressions in a phenomenological manner. Mathematical expression of the state of stress that will induce yielding on the onset of plastic deformation in general are called yield criteria. They are mostly functions of the principal stresses and shear stresses. For isotropic materials, they are just function of principal stresses. For isotropic material, we have to have certain assumptions in places, like there should be no Borschinger effect. That means yield strength in tension and compression should be equivalent. The volume should be constant. That is, the Poisson's ratio should be 0.5 for plastic regime. The magnitude of mean normal stress does not influence the yielding. This implies that the yielding is influenced by the size of Mohr circle and not the position of Mohr circle, because the position that is center depends on the principal stress and size that is radius depends on the shear stress. Shear stress is basically dependent on sigma 2 minus sigma, the difference in principal stresses. So we can write the yield criteria as a function of sigma 2 minus sigma 3, sigma 3 minus sigma 1 and sigma 1 minus sigma 2. This implies that if sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 can cause yielding, then the deviatoric stresses sigma 1 dash, sigma 2 dash, sigma 3 dash, which are obtained from subtracting the hydrostatic stress from each of the principal stress, will also cause yielding. These constraints imply that the following criteria are not universally acceptable for all solid and for all conditions under which load are applied. Now we come to our first important yield criteria, Tresca criteria. Tresca criteria postulates that the yielding will occur when the largest shear stress will reach a critical value, that is sigma 1 minus sigma 3 will reach a constant value, critical value. C value can be obtained from uniaxial tensile test keeping sigma 3 is equal to 0 and sigma 1 is equal to y, which gives us C is equal to Young's modulus. So in pure shear situation, we have sigma 1 is equal to k and sigma 3 is equal to minus k. Therefore, sigma 1 minus sigma 3 is equal to 2k, which is equal to y. Now coming to our second important criteria, that is von Mises criteria. Von Mises criteria states that when value of the root mean square of the shear stresses reach a critical value, we have yielding, which means that sigma 2 minus sigma 3 whole square plus sigma 3 minus sigma 1 whole square plus sigma 1 minus sigma 2 whole square whole divided by 3. In terms of y and k, we have 2y square is equal to 6k square. In most general form, it can be written as sigma x minus sigma z ka whole square, sigma z minus sigma y ka whole square, sigma x minus sigma y ka whole square, plus 6 tau xy plus tau yz plus tau zx ka whole square is equal to 6k square. Now when we draw von Mises and Tresca criteria and compare them on yield locus plot, for Tresca we get a hexagon with its vertices at sigma 1 and sigma 3 axis, and for von Mises we get an ellipse with alpha, that is sigma 3 minus sigma 1 as its principal axis. We see that the Tresca and von Mises give equal prediction when sigma is equal to 0, 1 or infinity, and greatest difference occur when sigma 3 upon sigma 1, that is alpha, is equal to minus 1, half or 2. Effective stress. Effective stress can be defined as a parameter which is a function of applied stresses which reaches a critical value when yielding occurs. For Tresca, sigma bar is equal to sigma 1 minus sigma 3. For von Mises, sigma bar is equal to under root of half sigma 2 minus sigma 3 whole square plus sigma 3 minus sigma 1 whole square plus sigma 1 minus sigma 2 whole square. Now when this sigma bar reaches a critical value, then yielding occurs. Therefore, sigma bar is equal to y for both criterion. But sigma bar is also equal to root 3k for von Mises and 2k for Tresca. So from these two conditions, we derive that k is equal to y by root 3 for von Mises and k is equal to y by 2 for Tresca. Now effective strain is defined such that the incremental work done per volume dW is equal to sigma bar d epsilon bar. That is the product of effective stress and effective strain is the incremental work done per unit volume. It can be shown for von Mises d epsilon bar, that is effective strain, is equal to under root of 2 by 3 d epsilon 1 square plus d epsilon 2 square plus d epsilon 3 square. For Tresca criteria, d epsilon bar is equal to mod of d epsilon max. This is not a very useful quantity. The above equation can be used in conjunction with the plastic incompressibility rule, that is delta V upon V is equal to epsilon 1, epsilon 2, epsilon 3. We can verify this for uniaxial tension and get d epsilon bar is equal to epsilon 1. That's all for today.